Hey, welcome to this next edition of Mazza's Musings. We are continuing our conversation with Greg Cameron, talking all about the NFL draft, talking about those prospects who are maybe outside of that top core group who can be key contributors to the New England Patriots this year and beyond. So in this segment, we're talking about the running backs, we're talking about the linebackers, and we're talking about one of my favorite groups in this draft, the wide receivers. So let's get right into it. All right, we're moving on to running backs now, getting back to some offense. Now, running back is like I feel like it's, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but I feel like it's low key. I'm not one who puts a lot of value in running backs. I'm one of those people who kind of feels like, yeah, you can kind of just keep it moving with them, and the same way that the Wolf doctrine kind of would imply. But it's a need. I mean, outside of what we've got, I'm trying to think of who's under contract. And off the top of my head, I'm coming up with Mondre and
Kevin Harris.
Okay, Harris is still under contract.
Believe so.
Is that it?
Believe so.
I'm not sure Harris is a lock for the roster. So,
No.
I think that this is, and especially if you're looking for the guy who's going to, if you're going to keep this rolling and keep moving on, and decide to move on from everybody's New England's favorite bowling ball, as I like to call him.
Oh yeah.
I just, you really have to you have to smartly invest.
I agree.
In the draft here. I don't want to overextend on this because there are so many needs, but I feel like there are some guys in this draft who they can leverage into at least significant roles. So the top three, the consensus top three that I had, you can correct me if this has changed since: Blake Corum from Michigan, Trey Benson, Florida State, and Jonathan Brooks from Texas.
I think we should say from the outset, we're not going to talk about a guy who I think that you and I have mock drafted to each other pretty much almost every time, and that's Blake Corum from Michigan, who is a stud.
Honestly, he's the only running back in this class who I would consider taking with a top 75 pick.
I agree.
And that's not necessarily that the others aren't talented. It's just that's also how I value running back compared to, other positions.
And I feel like it's probably fair to assume that you also, certainly when it comes to running backs, are kind of have the mindset of again, kind of the more that you can do, especially at that position. And I think the Patriots don't have that pass catching back that they've always had in the past, dating all the way back to Kevin Falk and to, Gerard Cherry and guys like this, kind of dating all the way back to there with James White, guys like James White and Shane Vereen, who I loved, and Danny Woodhead. There are guys like that they just don't have. So I think that's definitely something they need to stock up on.
So I feel like you're leading me in a direction here. I feel like
I'm not, but if you,
I'm not gonna go there first. He's definitely going to get talked about. But one thing that all those guys that you named, the Kevin Falks and the Shane Vereens and the James Whites of the world, the interesting thing was those guys were not pass catching backs in college. I mean, those guys were, toted the rock. I think that like
they were bell cows in college.
I think Shane Vereen's like career high for catches in the season was like 29. College, they don't really specialize like that as much. You have your back, and that's your back. And then you've got the backup who does essentially the same thing, just usually not quite as well. But I have a guy on my list who was a college pass catching back, and that's a little bit rare. But that's not the first guy that I'm talking about. The first guy that I'm talking about is pretty much the opposite end of the spectrum. I don't know how much he's going to give you in terms of catching the football, but the guy's a bulldozer who can explode through a hole, and his name is Audric Estime from Notre Dame.
The Domer has spoken. I was waiting for a Notre Dame guy to get taken in this, and I can't believe it took this long.
I know.
Please
I know.
Preach the gospel of Audric Estime.
I mean, he's just a guy who just keeps the legs churning. He doesn't have that extra gear to pull away, but PFF absolutely loved him. They gave him a 94 rushing grade. Like they absolutely love this guy. This guy can see the line. He sees the hole, and when he hits it, God help whoever's on the other side. And I I know that some people worry about, those bigger backs who just kind of run guys over, but he's shown the ability to, that short burst. He's not anybody who's going to have that long speed, but he's got that short burst to get through the line, to get to the second level and bury a defensive back.
He's the perfect 3 yards in a cloud of dust guy. And there aren't many guys that do that anymore. And I think the position, it's a little bit of an antiquated position, but I think what the Patriots could use is a guy who is sort of the thunder to kind of the lightning that is Ramondre Stevenson. And I think you can utilize the pass catching skills that Mondre possesses in a different way on different downs that aren't third. So I feel like Estime would definitely have a role on this team. And I think it's just very interesting that that's the first guy that you went with. I think it's the most Chris Mazza pick I think that you could have started out with, given the Notre Dame of it all and just the classic running back of it all with Audric Estime. But man, it'd be interesting to see what he could do in the pros. He's got a weird NFL case, but I feel like somebody's going to find him and just turn him into, I feel like a guy who's probably a similar, and I didn't look up comps for him because I knew you were going to take him, but I just feel like he has some DeAndre Swift to him that I think, just a guy who isn't afraid of contact and isn't afraid to just go right up the middle.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, he would provide that kind of, yes, the goal line, short line back is a bit antiquated in today's NFL. But with what they were working with, the Patriots were pretty terrible in the red zone. I mean, Ramondre couldn't find the end zone, with two hands in the flashlight. They brought in Zeke Elliott, and they were just like, well, at this point, Zeke Elliott can catch the ball okay, and he's good in short yardage. And it's well, okay, if you want to spend $4 to $6 million on a backup running back who's going to do that, fine. But here you can spend a fourth or fifth round draft pick and get that, and he's a guy who still has some burst. I'd be interested to see if he'd be able to get outside in the NFL to be able to when it is clogged up in the middle, if he'd be able to bounce to the outside to get around the edge before the defender does. So I think that's a question. I think a big thing that's going to jump out to. I don't think he's going to have a great 40. It's going to jump out to. I think it's going to jump out to people is that 10 split. How quickly he gets off that line. And that initial burst is what I love about him. So, if you can even make him a serviceable guy that the defense at least has to look at and be like, they might swing it out to him. That would, reduce the tell a little bit. So in time would tell if that could work. But I love the guy. I'm a Notre Dame guy, so I watched a ton of him. I just love that physicality that he brings. And honestly, it's an offense that's lacked grit. This guy brings grit, So, I understand that the NFL doesn't quite work like that anymore, but every so often you need to punch somebody in the mouth. And he's a guy who might be able to do that.
They don't have many lunch pail guys, and he'd be the lunch pailiest of the lunch pail guys. So my pick is, in the words of old Saturday Night Live, and now for something completely different. And so my first pick here is from another program that we've talked about a lot, from Clemson University, Will Shipley. And he's a guy who can just do a little bit of everything. Last year he was in 11 games for Clemson. He ran for 811 yards on 156 carries. And that's 5.2 yards per carry. Again, move the ball up the field. A guy like Shipley can help you move the ball up the field. He did have 3 fumbles, which, at least with Belichick gone, at least, we won't see him, shipped off to Siberia if, God forbid, he, fumbles a ball. But also, he's got some good hands. He made 29 catches for 222 yards. And again, a program like Clemson, they just produce just dudes. And I feel like, especially at running back, that's been a position that they've been able to just kind of create guys, going all the way back to CJ Spiller, which is probably still kind of the Bowden years, but they've always had pretty decent running backs. Travis Etienne had a pretty good year for Jacksonville this year, and I feel like the next guy kind of up in that lineage is Will Shipley, and they need somebody who can catch the ball out of the backfield and sort of be that complement to Ramondre, who's just so versatile that I feel like you can give him some spells a little bit, especially after getting hurt at the end of last year. So I just feel like Shipley can be that like next guy that comes up. As I was thinking about Elliott Wolf and his mindset of the programs that he's come through with, I kept thinking about the Packers, as we had kind of said from the top of, they always seem to just have the next guy ready to go. It's sort of like Pez out of the Pez dispenser, that there's always somebody right behind the guy before. And I feel like a guy like Shipley that can do everything, especially in probably a more West Coast set, like what AVP and TC McCartney are going to bring to New England, feel like a guy like a Will Shipley will be, kind of plug and play with the kind of West Coast offense that Van Pelt's going to bring.
Yeah, he was on my list initially, but I took him off because I figured you were going to take him. This may be a poor comp, but when I've looked at some of his clips, some of his tape, I can see kind of a little bit more athletic Rex Burkhead.
That's exactly kind of what I saw too. And a more athletic Rex Burkhead is a pretty dynamic player. I thought Burkhead, for parts of his spells here in New England, was pretty dynamic. And I think they just need athletes. And Shipley is an athlete.
All right, so since Shipley is officially off my board now, I'm going to go with a true underdog story, hailing from New Hampshire, Dylan Lave. I love this guy. You talk about versatility. This guy just brings it. At UNH, he had 749 rushing yards and 669 receiving yards out of the backfield. Asked to do a little bit of everything. On top of that, now people are like, oh well, okay, he plays in a lesser division. The guy had 296 yards against Central Michigan this year. 296 yards. Just absolutely ate their lunch. There are questions about how he'll measure up against the bigger guys, and obviously Central Michigan isn't a powerhouse program, but you can see that between that and the week that he had at the Senior Bowl, especially in the passing game, he also did some work at slot too at the Senior Bowl. So he's just one of those guys that is just like you're talking about guys who are athletic, who can do a little bit of everything. This guy fits that to a T.
You need the guy who's going to be the wheel route guy. The Patriots presently don't have the wheel route guy, especially after letting Pierre Strong go, who, if you kind of saw as the year went on, in this very same offense that the Patriots are going to run now, kind of get those opportunities and was the guy in on that route, and they just don't have that kind of guy. And I feel like Dylan Lave, who, if I may, has been your draft crush throughout this entire process, the Hunter Luepke of this year's draft, who hopefully Jerry Jones would ever just let him go and maybe he can come rightfully home to New England, but I digress. I just feel like I think the Patriots drafting Lave is something I could definitely see, especially because he's a local guy. And also at the same point, he fits a need that they have. They don't have that pass catching back that just kind of does a little bit of everything, can be the bell cow back, as you said, had 296 yards against the Chippewas of Central Michigan. They need an all-purpose guy. And I think Wabe in this draft is one of those guys that I could see being that guy.
All right. So we've been kind of filtering through a lot of these, these pass catchers. Is your next guy a pass catcher as well?
He's a guy who can do it. The next guy on my list is Cody Schrader from Missouri, who's got some pretty good size. He's got some sneaky speed. This past year, he played 12 games, had 1,483 yards on the ground on 248 carries, 6.0 yards per carry with 13 touchdowns. Fumbled only once, and then in the passing game, he had 21 catches for 192 yards. Again, a guy who can do a little bit of everything. And that Missouri team, they were just so fun. They were one of those fun, weird teams that just kind of snuck out, from obscurity and played really well in a pretty tough SEC. And I feel like, especially the fact that he's a guy who came from a Division II school, I feel like there's a little bit of like misplaced Danny Woodhead vibes there. But I feel like again, he's another one of those guys who can just do a little bit of everything and be somebody that could just fill in for Ramondre if God forbid something happened.
I have nothing to add. That was perfect. Um,
Thank you.
so because you picked Shipley, I did have one more that he was actually higher on my list until he ruptured his biceps at the bicep tendon at the Senior Bowl, and that's Rasheen Ali out of Marshall. He's one of those smallish home run hitter types. He's one of those guys who has the ability to hit the hole and then break away. He's got that breakaway speed. He's certainly not a bell cow by any means, but in today's NFL, he's one of those kind of jitterbugs who can have a role. Obviously how the injury impacts his the rest of his draft process, is going to play a major role in how all that plays out and how interested I'd be moving forward. But he's a guy who you just look at it and you see when he hits that next gear, you kind of just lean back in your chair a little bit and go, ooh, that's
Yeah.
that's something I haven't seen much. So
Yeah, great pick. I mean, especially Marshall's a football factory, and I feel like getting a guy like that. It sucks that he got hurt at the Senior Bowl. Maybe he can be available later on in the draft, and I feel like he could be another one of those kind of sit and stash guys. I think that was a great pick by you. He's definitely an unheralded gem as part of this year's class.
he's supposed to be ready for the season, but I wonder if he's one of those guys who maybe you see if you can, I mean, he may, depending on how it looks, he may fall, into UDFA territory. And at that point, is he someone that you try to get on your practice squad and let him heal up and, dive into the playbook and develop him on the practice field while he's not seeing the field on Sunday?
Could be a prime Foxborough flu guy. Exactly. My third guy that I had, again, was from a team that I watched a lot, and that's the University of Washington. The third guy on my list is Dylan Johnson. Did it all for Washington. He's got good size, good hands. Feels like he's kind of mid-round range. You could see he got hurt a little bit in the title game, and that's where kind of things got a little dicey for UW. But I feel like if this new offense kind of introduces some different blocking and rushing kind of schemes and tactics, be interesting to add somebody who would be a true understudy to Ramondre, who also can do a little bit of everything. And I feel like getting guys from programs that were pretty diverse are on the ball and being able to kind of come into this new offense. I feel like a guy like Dylan Johnson would be a great understudy for Ramondre. And then if they go the Packers route of having that next guy, he'd be a pretty good fill-in for Ramondre if he's the next guy up.
All right. So for the Gary Brown best name, we're working on the title. Should we present these these people with something? Should we send them a letter, or a plaque or
I
something
could
saying,
absolutely make a certificate on Canva easily. We should do that actually. They're going to
so
think, who are these weirdos from Massachusetts who sent me this piece of paper?
at best that's what they'll think. Uh, so the name that I have for best name is Cavassier Smoke from Colorado via Kentucky.
Awesome.
The way
I have a name that's very similar.
So he evidently hates his first name, so he just goes by Smoke. So either way, it's great.
Awesome.
He was
Awesome.
he was also
No
the first
notes.
player. He was also the first player at Kentucky to wear zero. So running back wearing zero.
Yeah. After watching a lot of DeAndre Swift with the Eagles, I love a running back wearing zero. The name that I had, it's very similar from the University of South Carolina, Lavassier Carroll.
All right. See, we're definitely on the same wavelength with this.
Great minds think alike, boss.
All right,
All right,
so
where to next, Chris?
we are on to linebackers, and let's see.
Perfect.
So the top three are Edrin Cooper, Texas A&M, Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Clemson, who's one of my draft crushes, but we won't talk about it today, and Junior Colson from Michigan. Michigan players are just all over these lists.
They were great. They were great all year, and they didn't even need Harbaugh taking suspensions for buying burgers for breakfast and potentially having a cheating scandal to make them even better. That program was awesome this year.
All right, so you want to start us off with the linebackers?
I will. I'm going to go with a guy from a program that I really like, and they're kind of a weird program, so they're perfect for me. And that is a linebacker from North Carolina State University. That is Peyton Wilson, who is absolutely one of my draft crushes this year. Was a fifth-year senior in 12 games, in 716 snaps. He had 92 tackles, 31 assists, 67 stops. And while in coverage, he had 3 pass breakups, 3 interceptions, and an outstanding quarterback rating when targeted. That's right. The quarterback rating when targeted was 47.2. Mac Jones could never. And as a pass rusher, 22 total pressures, 9 quarterback hurries, 7 hits, and 6 sacks. A guy who can do a little bit of everything. Does that sound like somebody who's in the building now? Because
Oh yeah.
it sounds to me like Gerard Mayo and then his understudy, who's now his inside linebackers coach, Dante Hightower. And
Hmm.
I feel like with Mayo running the show, they're going to want running or linebackers who do a little bit of everything. So Peyton Wilson is another one of my draft crushes, certainly on the defensive side of the ball, who just does a little bit of everything on a program that was just plumb mad dog mean.
Yeah, Wilson was also my number one pick, so I'm just gonna call that. We're just totally in sync with that. I think the only thing that's kept him out of the top three here is he's got a very long injury history. So that's something that the medicals will be important. But I mean, based on the way he played in 2023, I don't see how any of it has slowed him down. And like you said, he's just a guy who did everything. So co-sign on that one. If you want to just go right into your next one, I'm just going to skip. I'm just bowing to you on that one because it was exactly
Yeah,
what
I'm going to go with from Ohio State, Tommy Eichenberg, who's a guy again.
again.
I feel like you and I just look at linebackers a lot, a lot of the same way. Like he's another guy who's done a little bit of everything. 57 tackles, 27 of them assists, 31 stops. Quarterback rating was pretty high when targeted, but he had two pass breakups. As in terms of pass rushing, 11 total pressures, 8 quarterback hurries, 2 quarterback hits, and 1 sack in the season. Again, a guy who you can stick in the middle of your defense and do anything. They kind of could use a guy like that who's a linebacker who can do a little bit of everything, and be the guy after Jawan Bentley. They kind of need a guy like that, especially if Bentley gets hurt. I don't know who that next guy would be. I don't know that it's Mapu, who's a little small compared to traditional Patriots linebackers, but I just feel like a guy like Eichenberg, who paired with Jack Sawyer, who I think is going back to Ohio State, were just so key to the middle of that defense.
Yeah, with Eichenberg, the one thing he's one of those guys who's not quite as quick, but he's the guy who always seems to be taking the right angle. So he's not quite as quick. I think that's why with the passer rating it's a little bit higher because some of those quicker backs that he's trying to cover out of the backfield or more athletic tight ends he might struggle a little bit with. So he may not be the 3 down linebacker that Wilson might be. But one thing that Gerard Mayo said earlier in a press conference is that he'd rather have a guy who he knows is going to take the right first step and maybe be a little bit slower than the guy who runs a 4-2 but is running in the wrong direction. Tommy Eichenberg is going to run in the right direction. And I think that that's valuable. When you have the guy that you can trust, that he's going to hit the spot that he's got to hit.
Well put.
All right. So again, we're totally in sync with those two. So I'm just going to keep it moving along. So I'm going to move on to my third, and then we'll go to your third, if I'm counting correctly, right?
Go
That
for it.
so
Yeah.
the Domer's coming out again. JD Bertrand, Notre Dame. Maybe it's just because I'm a Notre Dame guy, but I love this guy. Now, a couple of something I found interesting when I was doing some research. A couple of Notre Dame coaches were both individually asked separately who he reminded them of. They both said Sean Lee.
Who's in the
Now,
league a long time,
right,
dependable, was all
exactly.
over the field.
Getting that kind of endorsement. Now, granted, they're Notre Dame coaches. There's a bias there. But even Sean Lee Light is a guy who has a place on this team, has and the leadership qualities that this guy has, and the football IQ that he's displayed. He just strikes me as one of those guys that, especially, probably a day three pick, but is a guy who could be a solid piece of your linebacker depth, a great guy to have in the room and in the locker room. I mean, I just love that guy.
Yeah, I mean that's especially when you hear the comp to Sean Lee, who was a captain in Dallas forever. It seems like I feel like again the Patriots don't. It's not that they have like a leadership vacuum, but I feel like there are certain places where they could use a guy who's going to be the guy after the guy. And I feel like when you have a good leader like a Jawan Bentley, you need the guy who's going to kind of fill that vacuum afterwards. And they don't quite have that guy yet. So a guy like Bertrand, guys like Peyton Wilson and Tommy Eichenberg could then be that next guy. I'm glad that you took a guy who was not my next pick, and I'm so glad. And let me tell you, after the first two, I was a little worried. My third guy is Jalen Ford from Texas, and in that Texas team on defense, they were pretty good. He played 13 games in 733 snaps for the Longhorns. In terms of kind of pass rushing, 21 total pressures, 13 quarterback hurries, 6 hits, and 2 sacks, 2 interceptions, 1 pass breakup. And then as a tackler, it's 63 tackles, 26 assists, 45 stops against the run, which is awesome. You kind of need that. You need that guy who sort of has that ability. Bentley's great at it. And I feel like, again, to kind of find the guy after the guy, Jalen Ford would be a guy who just does a little bit of everything.
No, yeah, he's the very definition of a guy. He's one of those guys you can put in, and he's going to do the job, especially against the run, like you pointed out. He's the guy who's waiting in the hole for the running back who thinks that hole is open. He so many times it looked like the hole was there, and he just stepped in it so quickly that it enclosed that. It was really impressive. So yeah, I think that he could be a guy who, again, is that, is part of a linebacking unit. I don't know if particularly they're going to have a lot of, three down guys. I think it is, it's going to continue to be a lot of matching up personnel and that kind of thing. And, having, like you said, having those guys who can stop the run. I mean, how important was Jennings to this team on the outside this year, setting edges? I think that that's certainly an important thing. If they took him, I certainly wouldn't be sad about it.
And I think I'm glad you brought up Jennings too, especially with how this coaching staff is comprised now with Drew Wilkins from the Baltimore Ravens on their coaching staff. Name me a time when the Ravens have had bad outside linebacker play. I can't remember it. And I think bringing in somebody from a program that really prides themselves in their outside linebacker play, that can only be good things for a guy like an Anthony Jennings, or if they take a Jalen Ford in this year's draft.
All right. So, in terms of our best names here, I actually have two here because I couldn't decide.
Ooh,
One of them is Ra Ra Dilworth from UNC.
that's a great
Uh,
name. That is a good
and,
one.
and the other one was just, so plays for Wyoming, just sounds like a cowboy name, Easton Gibbs.
Ooh, good one. I did not have Easton. I didn't have either of those guys. My guy was a guy that we definitely mocked late. Another guy from that really fun Ohio State defense. I took Steel Chambers.
Yes.
Just sounds like a Harlequin romance novel writer. or like an action hero that would be like in a parody of like action films from the 80s, Steel Chambers. And I feel like you got to say it in like the in kind of the Christian Bale like Batman voice, be like, "Where is he? Where's Steel Chambers? Where is he?" I love it. Give me Steel
Okay.
Chambers.
Excellent. You win this round for sure. That's great.
I don't know. Robert Dilworth is really legendary.
Yeah, that is, I didn't have time to kind of like dive into where that one came from. If Rara is actually his name or if it's, a nickname, I feel like that merits some more research that I didn't have time to do. So I feel I dropped the ball a little bit there. But yeah, I mean there are some good certain position groups. There are a number of good names.
Oh yeah.
All right, so now we're moving on to, one of the most fun groups to talk about in this draft. Both whether you're a Patriots fan and you're just dying for some talent in this group, or you're just a football fan because it's just so freaking deep. And that's the wide receiver. I think we all know who the top three are here, but just, for the sake of recording it, Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State, Malik Nabers, LSU. I literally almost said Nabers, and I know what his name is, but every time I look at it, my brain says Nabers. Uh, and Rome Odunze, Washington.
Perfect. And I think that's the consensus top three. It really
Yeah.
is.
All right. So, do you want to lead us off with wide receivers? Because I feel like
I
we
would
might have some of the same names, but we'll see how this goes.
I would love to. The first guy I have is a big X receiver, and would definitely give the Patriots something that they just presently don't have, especially at somebody who is 6'4", and that's Adonai Mitchell from Texas, and just a big body speedster that they don't have. He had 55 catches for just under 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and that would give them an exciting playmaker that likely would be available at 34. So give me Adonai Mitchell from Texas.
So, I did not have him, and when you said 6'4", I thought you were going a different way. So my first pick is Brian Thomas, LSU, who's also 6'4". He's 6'4", 205. He gets kind of lost behind neighbors, but he's one of those guys he's a bigger guy. He's a little bit light at 205 for given his height. So nobody's going to confuse him for, N'Keal Harry or something like that, which I think people worry about when we're talking about those tall receivers. But this is a guy who he's primarily a vertical threat, but LSU lined him up all over the place, in the slot, on the outside, and it feels like you can break him loose out of bunch formations and trips and things like that. So, he could be that consistent downfield threat that, I mean, they haven't really had since, I mean, what? Who was the last? Chris Hogan? Was he the last one you could call consistent? And I mean, he, I suppose, was consistent for some time, and then he just started running wind sprints. But yeah, so he's not a huge contested catch guy, which is, for his size, for his height, you'd think he'd be more of that. But he's just the guy who's going to get behind you and then long stride it to the end zone.
Yeah, great pick. I feel like he's a guy who probably could get taken at the end of the first, maybe even early second. Like if he's sitting there at 34, I feel like Elliott Wolf should run that card up to the podium and have the Patriots take a guy like that. And I feel the same way about Mitchell too, that if he's, they need a big body guy who has some speed, and I feel like they just don't have that. Devontae Parker certainly isn't that guy. And
Yeah.
I think they need a guy who is that guy.
All right. So who you got next?
The guy I have next is a guy who played a really, really bad, well, not really bad, but just aesthetically unpleasing Texas A&M team, and that's Aeneas Smith, who's a speedy slot type who they don't. They have Pop Douglas, but I think if you think about a lot of these kind of the Patriots traditions over the last several years, you think about how they had basically two different slot guys all at once. They had Troy Brown and Wes Welker in '07. They had Welker and Edelman after that, and then had Edelman and Danny Amendola. And I think being able to kind of pair two really speedy guys within the slot would kind of be a great traditional fit for the Patriots. Granted, in the offense that Alex Van Pelt runs, I don't quite know where there's a spot for a guy like an Aeneas Williams, but he's so fast and he's just so good that I feel like just a guy who would fit in well here. The comparisons that I saw kind of compared him to Sky Moore on the Kansas City Chiefs and Charlie Jones, who were kind of some recent speedy slot types. Certainly guys that we liked in previous drafts, in the pre-Pop Douglas era of our lives. But I feel like if they're able to kind of just get two very fast guys in the middle, it's going to be tough to cover that many guys within the middle of the field. So he was like the one lone bright spot on that Texas A&M team that was so dreadful that the 12th man let Jimbo Fisher walk for, the GDP of Belize and to stop coaching them. But Aeneas Smith was kind of the one bright spot and a really weird season for the Aggies.
No, yeah, that's a good one. I think that certainly with the condition of that offense as a whole, he's someone who's not getting the attention that, some of the guys who, have similar physical tools do. Yeah, I think that he, given the right, slot in the draft could be a steal. All right, so who I've got next is, yeah, I mean, I think we both have him somewhere on our list, but Roman Wilson from Michigan.
I
He,
didn't take him because I knew you'd take him.
I feel like there's enough out there about him at this point that there's not a lot new that I can say. But the dude just, I mean, he stole the show at the Senior Bowl. He made, I know that one-on-ones are, basically, designed to, they're designed in such a way that the receiver has the advantage, but he was just so good and so smooth and just put everyone in a blender. He has a lot of that Amon-Ra St. Brown to him, in terms of the fluidity and like, as someone who could take over the game from the slot position. I dare not say, he could take over a game from the slot position like an Edelman because I don't want to, draw those comparisons because I don't think they're the same kind of player. But that kind of dynamic where somebody can work from the inside out and really stress a defense. I just love that. I love the idea of that. I love the player. I mean, he did it in some of the biggest moments too this season.
It's really funny hearing you kind of talk about that, about a guy who can kind of take over a game from the slot like that. I think about kind of kind of Patriots from days gone by, and a guy like that who had that kind of speed and dynamicism was a guy like a guy who we both really liked. Jabbar Gaffney was that way, of a guy who could do a little bit of everything. You could move him all over. Roman Wilson could be like a Jabbar Gaffney with a Hemi inside of him. And I feel like they don't have many guys who are just speedy. And I use that term, very, very positively, and certainly not as a pejorative for a wide receiver who was on the national championship team, but a speedy guy who just does it. And Roman Wilson, the only reason I didn't put him on my list is because you and I have mocked him a ton between each other. That he's a guy I desperately want at either 34 or at 68 in this draft.
Who comes in next for you?
All right. Yes. This player is the younger brother of the reigning offensive player of the year in the NFL, Christian McCaffrey. I get that. I'm not trying to really buy into the Nepo baby thing. I'm not. The next guy on my list is Luke McCaffrey from Rice. Luke McCaffrey went into college as a quarterback, and then he was a wide receiver who got invited to the Senior Bowl and turned some heads at the Senior Bowl. He could be a really fun, kind of found late in the draft and be used in a bunch of different ways. There's a term that the Red Sox front office, who we'll talk about probably at a future date, that they love to use called positional versatility. And the term positional versatility screams to me Luke McCaffrey. You could put him in the backfield if you wanted to. You could put him in the slot. You could probably put him outside if you wanted to. And I just feel like a guy for a team like this, they need playmakers, especially even late in the draft. We don't know what's going to happen with Kayshon Boutte this year with his FanDuel proclivities, but I feel like they just need somebody late in the draft who they can plug and play. And what I saw in Mobile, McCaffrey seemed like that kind of guy for me.
My last guy kind of goes along with your thoughts of having two speedy, slot guys. And again, like you said, I'm not sure exactly how that works in the AVP system. If there's a place for that. Now, I think he got injured at the Senior Bowl, but I'm not sure what the status of that was. Is Jacob Cowing from Arizona. Honestly, I'm going to keep it relatively short. The guy is basically he's a better route running Pop Douglas. Like the one
Great.
the one bugaboo with Pop that we heard a lot was his routes weren't always correct or crisp. Cow's a technician when it comes to the route running. So it seems like a redundancy with Pop, but if you decide to run your offense that way, there are a lot worse ways than you can go. And he's someone who's probably, going to not cost a premium pick. So, you can invest, you can do that without, mortgaging another valuable spot.
And I think it can't be, ignored that he played for, Patriots' old friend Jed Fish at Arizona in a program that probably has some similarities to offenses gone by.
Right.
And I feel like that's probably a voice that front office trusts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's that's a call that's going to be made when this process is going on. Just like, hey, I know you're a little busy moving and everything, but you mind telling me a little bit about old Jacob there?
There's a guy that I'll also talk about in our list too from that very same program, and I'll say a lot of the same things. Of the guy you call is a guy you've had in your building who's going to give you the unvarnished truth about this player. And I feel like it's going to be weird with the new regime and figure out who their kind of collegiate allies are. But I feel like Jed Fish is probably a good place to start, and there are worse places to start.
Yeah,
than
absolutely.
Jed Fish.
All right, so who do you have in your names list for this one?
I had a wide receiver who played at Pitt named Bub Means.
Oh, such a great football name.
Bub.
Just a pure football name.
Because I feel like it's the kind of name that like a coach could absolutely like kind of yell at a guy for, being like, Bub, what are you doing? Bub, what are you doing? Yeah, Bub Means Pittsburgh. Come on down.
All right, so I've got so I'm gonna give you his real first name first, and then his nickname. It's well, no, I'm not gonna try. I'm not gonna try his. I didn't look up the pronunciation of his first name, so I'm just gonna leave it alone. So I'm just gonna go with his nickname. It's Tulu Griffin from Arkansas. So the nickname Tulu originated because his original nickname was Too Loose because of how quick he was. Now that's according to the Michigan or the Arkansas Media Guide, so it's got to be true. But yeah, that just oozes, wide receiver hubris there, that you just love to see.
And does that not sound like the kind of guy who would play for a coach who I think is a little weird, but like a nice enough guy like Sam Pittman? Like I feel like Sam Pittman would recruit a kid who's like, oh, okay, he goes by a nickname that derives from Too Loose because he was so fast. Yeah, bring him to Fayetteville. Bring him over.
Hey, thanks for listening to another great episode of Maz's Musings. Thanks a lot to Greg Cameron, who continues to just bring it with this discussion on the possible prospects for the Patriots in this draft. We've had a lot of fun with this. We've still got a bunch of position groups to get through in our third and fourth segments, which will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. I hope you've appreciated it as much as I have. It's been a lot of fun. You got something to say? Send me an email, mazasmusings@gmail.com. You can always hit me up on Twitter as well, @mazasmusings. As you're listening to this, I'm probably still on vacation, but I promise you, next week we'll have another installment, and I can't wait for you to hear it. In the meantime, have a great weekend, and thanks for listening.